Hey everybody! Oh, my God! It's your main man, Anthony Brogdon, coming at you. Oh man, I got a sister on the channel today. You gonna love what this sister got to tell you. Oh, this we jamming here, strong inspirations. I give it to you straight, no chaser, to intoxicate your mind, not where you DUI, but where you stagger because of what the guests on the show tell you. I am super excited. This sister she is well thought of in her community. Oh, this is the real deal, Holyfield, on Strong Inspirations. Come on now, hit the subscribe button. It's free. I don't ask no information. It just let me know you like what I'm doing. Because I'm gonna keep doing this. And hit the like button on this one, because there is no love button. You're gonna like this a lot. Hit the notifications bell for when the videos come up. You get a ding, a shock, a smoke signal, your lights flicker. Somebody tells you something that they heard, that there's new information and videos on Strong Inspirations. And then tell somebody, don't keep it to yourself, my people. From around the world, let this flow. Check it out. Today, I am celebrating the 3-year anniversary of Strong Inspirations. We over 500 videos. It started on a whim because of that COVID virus that came on us in the 2020. I thought, what else can I do to keep this information alive? And here we are. I am excited about this. We're going to do a little celebration tonight, too, here in this town of Detroit. Because this thing is real. And it's because of people like this lady who come on the show. And did you see the one I did with the sister who integrated a school in 1965 in Gainesville, Florida, and the students tried to kill her? They beat her up real bad. And then she staggers into the principal's office, and the principal said, and you can't use my phone. She staggers across the street. She calls her dad. Dad says, hey, well, this integrating thing, we're going to have to figure out another way. She said, nah, Pops, I'm going back. They can't stop me. Watch that video. How about the one that I did with the guy he's 13 years old. This is in Jackson, Mississippi. And he was enthralled with the Freedom Riders. So he went to see him, ride his bike down there. He missed them. But the state trooper thought, hey, man, what you doing here? You must be a Freedom Rider. And they put him in jail for 5 days. Watch that video. How about the one where the lady says her great, I don't know how many greats, grandfather was, got beat up. Well, he beat up the white guy is really what happened. He left town, and when he went back to go to his father's funeral, they never saw him again. Can only imagine what happened to him. Watch that video. And it's more stuff that I talk about. It's not of that nature. And this sister's got something that is, also. How about the one I talk about with the guy who goes in those pyramids in Egypt? Been doing it for 40 some odd years, and he tells you what you will see inside the pyramid. He wrote a book on it. Watch that one. Or the one where the guy he's out of Massachusetts, and his family, he traced his family back to the enslavement ship and how Black folks got to Massachusetts and got their freedom. Watch that video. There's so many of them on here. And I'm keeping you informed, my brothers and my sisters. And then let me also say, and this is how serious I am, I took 2 years out of my life and I produced this documentary, Business in the Black, the rise of Black business in America. They did not tell me there were enslaved Black folks who went to college or enslaved Black folks who own businesses. I put that in this documentary, and it's streaming on Amazon. I took it to 40 cities across America. I went one step further and I wrote this book. It has become America's #1 Black business history book. You got to get you a copy of this. Very reasonably priced, because I want you to have it. Get them out of my basement. I know what's in here. Come on now. Get you a copy of this. It's on Amazon and businessintheblack.net. And if you go to the website, that's where you can get it for an autograph, which could mean something one day. Now, you
Yes.
hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word. Strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to my guest today. She's a strong soul sister. Come on, lady, introduce yourself. Let's get it on. Thank you for being here.
I just want to say I love your energy, your spirit, your enthusiasm. I'm very excited to be here. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Briana Barner. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Maryland. I study Black podcasts and Black culture. I love Black culture. I love everything Black, and I'm very grateful to be able to do it professionally, full-time, and get paid for it.
Yeah.
I wanted to also tell you that I am from Chicago, so Midwest represent. Very excited to be
Yeah.
here, and I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to our conversation.
All right. Well, okay. Let's get it on then. But I got to ask a couple questions about you. Where were you born and raised? You kind of alluded to it, but where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in Chicago, Illinois,
All right. South Side.
South Side.
Uh, what is that? All the Black neighborhood? Were there white kids near you in some respects?
No, I grew up in a extremely Black neighborhood. I went to all Black schools from preschool, daycare, all the way up to college. I went to HBCU. I went to Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. So all Black everything from the moment I stepped onto this planet until I went to grad school. I was surrounded by Blackness.
All right. What does that make you think about white people in those early days? What was your feeling on them?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't. It honestly wasn't until I went to a military camp in Indiana called Culver Military Academy, and I went there for 2 summers, and that was honestly my first real interaction with a group of white people because I went to that camp for 6 weeks. It was a sleepaway camp, and I went there when I was 8 and 9. So that was really my first introduction, and it was like a completely different world. But the beauty of that camp was that it wasn't just white people. It was an international camp. So people came from all over the world to spend time at this camp. Like one of my really good friends at that camp, I'll never forget her. She was from Bogota, Colombia. And so literally people came from all over the world at this camp. And it was a fantastic experience. So that was my first time kind of stepping outside of the comfort of being around all Black people and being exposed to so many different kinds of people. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
All right, I'm gonna stay on that just a tad. So when you did you try to change a little bit of who you were? Did you try to maybe I'm gonna talk a little more proper? I'm gonna act a little different, or did you come with that swag and you know what I mean, the Chicago inner city
Yeah.
swag?
Yeah, so if you listen to videos of me from that time period, I definitely sounded more proper. I definitely mirrored the way that people around me were talking. And when my family would visit me, they would be like, "Why are you talking like that?" And it took me a while to be like, "You're right. I am talking different than how I normally talk." But again, it was because it was my first time being around other people. So I was kind of just like taking on their different personalities. I was meeting so many different people. And so the second year that I came back, I didn't do that as much because I think I was more comfortable in myself. It wasn't such a culture shock. And it was like, oh, I can be myself. I don't have to take
Yeah, I
on other
love it.
people's personalities. Yeah.
All right.
So, but yeah, when I first came, definitely sounded like a Valley girl.
Okay. How did you know how to do it though? How did you know how to talk different?
I don't know. I think it was just like I was 8, so I was very impressionable. And I think that because it was such a culture shock, it was like, I need to figure out a way to make sense of all these different personalities, all these different cultures. And so I was like, the best way for me to do that is to kind of mimic what I'm seeing.
I
Because I mean, we
got you.
all were the same age. So I think that
Yeah.
we all were kind of mimicking each other. And it was the
Yeah,
first time for
sure.
a lot of us that they're meeting somebody from the South Side of Chicago or meeting someone from Columbia. So we're all just kind of like taking on all these different personalities and cultures and like having our own little mixing pot, I guess, of different cultures.
All right, I got a couple more on that. So then, when you went back home to Chicago, and for a minute you slipped up and kept that personality, let's say,
Mhm.
Did somebody in the neighborhood try to beat you up because who you think you are talking like that?
No, it was more so just being teased by like my family, like, why are you talking like a white
Yeah,
girl? You
yeah,
know? And
yeah.
so that was kind of like the first time that I was like, talking like a white girl, what do you mean? But
Right.
I had definitely been told before I went to the camp that I talked like a white girl, that I talked
Oh,
proper.
really?
Yeah, and I didn't think much about it. I was just like, well, what does that mean? Like I didn't
Right.
understand really what it meant. But then once I went to the camp and then came back, I was like, oh, I get what y'all are saying now. I sound different from, I mean, because I grew up in the hood all my life.
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
I sound different. And it wasn't until I left that I was like, oh, I sound different. But to the people at the camp, I probably sounded different to them too, especially because I'm sure that was one of the first times that they had met,
yeah,
someone
yeah.
from the South Side.
All right, I'm gonna stay on that. Just talking about like a white girl means you talk proper, you pronunciate your words clearly.
Mhm.
Um, does that scare you when you walk through the hood saying, "Oh man, I got to watch this"? You know what I'm saying? Because and then does the
Yeah.
black people try to put you down for that? What's that dynamic, and how does that do to your psyche?
So I think that I became really good at code switching. So like
There
I
you go.
can, put on how, proper speak. And I can also, my Chicago accent can come out really easily too. And especially like when I go home and I'm around my family and friends, it comes out very easily. So I think that but very quickly realized like, okay, in certain instances, you talk like this. In certain instances, you talk like that. And I can kind of
Yeah,
flip flop back and forth. So
yeah,
it's kind of like speaking a different language of like knowing when to be comfortable enough to kind of let my accent come out and like use
yeah,
certain words. And then when I'm at
yeah,
other places, it's like, nope, let me not, use
yeah.
those words or use that way of talking. So I think I
All right.
became really, really good at that.
All right, I like this. We're gonna get to the topic. So, growing up in the hood like that, um do you wish that did anybody try to hold you back? You getting all A's and you getting good grades. How do you because I've heard kids say this. Um I had to dummy down at times. I didn't want them knowing I was getting all A's. How do you deal with that? And I'm assuming that was the case, understandably, but how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that actually wasn't my experience. One, I think because I didn't go to my neighborhood schools.
Oh,
So
okay.
I went to schools in other neighborhoods. And so that could be, a reason why. And so
Yeah,
everybody that were in my classes, we were all gifted and put into these
I
special
got you.
programs.
I
So
got you.
I wasn't really around people who weren't on the same wave. Now we all came from similar neighborhoods, and not all, but a lot of us came from similar neighborhoods.
I got
But
you.
my friends weren't in the neighborhood that I grew up, so I
I
never,
got
I
you.
never had
Yeah,
that issue.
yeah, that happened to me too in high school. I went to a school that all the let's say gifted kids went to.
Mhm.
Now coming out of Chicago in your family background, how did they get there? Where's the plantation at in your family? Do you know that?
So yeah, so it's interesting because my dad's side of the family, migrated from like Alabama, Georgia. I believe one of my grandparents is from Mississippi. And then on my mom's side of the family, I think I might also have, family in Mississippi. I don't think Alabama and Georgia, but definitely like the Mississippi, like that area. So they kind of come from, different states, but that area is definitely where the majority of the people who live there, a lot of them migrated to the Midwest. So I do have family in Chicago where I'm, born and raised, have family in St. Louis, have family in Ohio. If I'm not mistaken, I think I have family in Michigan too. So definitely like the core Black
Yeah.
areas of the Midwest, my family kind of sprinkled throughout.
Well, why do black people move to Chicago? I know they moved to Detroit to be in the automotive and stuff. What was the industry
Mhm.
in Chicago?
So I think that like and I'm not as familiar with Isabel Wilkerson's book, The Warmth of Other Suns, but like
Mhm.
she traces where like different groups based on where they are and where they were in the South, they all would kind of migrate to different places. And so it makes sense that my family, was in Alabama, was in Georgia, was in Mississippi. And so if you already know people in those areas that are
Right,
moving to
right,
Chicago or St. Louis or wherever, then it would make sense that you would just follow suit because you already
right.
have a community. And then if you, once you get to Chicago or St. Louis or wherever, it's very easy to find people that are probably in from the community that you grew up in. So a
Yeah,
lot of people that I know from Chicago, we have similar stories. Our families are from those same areas. So I think that it's
right.
like, hey, we're going to kind of take our community from these areas and just
Yeah,
follow each other and start a new community in a place that is unfamiliar, but they make it familiar because they find, like-minded communities and build their own
yeah,
support networks.
yeah. Chicago is very segregated, as
Very,
most cities.
very.
But
Mhm.
Doesn't have that moniker only because Detroit was so dominated by Black people, and
Right, right,
Chicago didn't have that.
right.
Did they tell you don't go downtown growing up, or did you see and hear some of the riots and the strife that happened in Chicago?
So Chicago, like you said, is very segregated. I think it's one of the most segregated cities in the country. And
Yeah,
you can look on a map of Chicago and Chicago has a ton of different neighborhoods. You can look on a map of Chicago and see the different neighborhoods. And based on the neighborhoods, you can tell who lives there. So
right.
there's a reason why you asked me, am I from the South Side?
That's
I
right.
am from the South Side,
Right.
but when people think of Black people in Chicago, they think of the South Side, and there's
Right.
a reason for that. Like
Right.
we are very heavily populated on the South Side,
Right.
and so I mean, it doesn't matter where I go. When I tell people that I'm from Chicago, the first question they ask, "Are you from the South Side?"
That's
And
right.
I'm like, "What makes you think I'm from the South Side?" You know, I can tell that you've never even been to Chicago, but you just assume that I'm from Chicago. But
Right.
again, it's because
Yeah,
of how
that's right.
segregated it was.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a part of the reason why I was kind of in this Black bubble is because the South Side is so heavily populated with Black people.
Yeah.
But then so I grew up in South Shore, which is like near Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
And so that area is very populated with Black people, hugely populated. And then so you have, Southeast. So a lot of people from Chicago would say over East. So that's where I grew up, over East. And then you can have Southwest, which the Southwest area is definitely populated by Black people, but you also will find a very Hispanic population. And then on the North Side, I did not go on the North Side very often at all, not because it was far away. We just didn't go. The West Side is a little bit more diverse. I have family members that were from the West Side, and so we would go visit there. But I, had my bubbles that I would visit.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
funny now that as an adult, when I go back to visit my friends, they hang out downtown all the time. And like they go to
Right.
brunch, downtown or on the
Sure.
north side.
Sure.
And I'm like, that is so strange to me because we didn't do that growing up. But now as adults, they do. But as a child, I would have never been like, oh yeah, let me just go hang out on the north side.
Yeah.
I just wouldn't do that. And it
Yeah.
wasn't because
Sure.
I felt scared or anything. I just had no reason
Yeah. Right. Right.
to go
Right.
over there. And so I
Right.
didn't. Just like I'm sure that people on the north side are like, go to the south side for what? And so it's interesting. I saw this video, a TikTok, and it was like, I'm from Chicago, and it was like different like things that people from Chicago supposedly would relate to. And there were two white people who was doing the video. And I'm watching the video and I'm like, I don't relate to any of these experiences. And I'm like, this shows how segregated Chicago is because they're like, oh yeah, if you're from Chicago, you've experienced all this stuff. And I'm like, no, I've never experienced any of that.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
how, how does a young lady, and I'm talking about you, go from Chicago to South Carolina Bennett College?
So North Carolina, there
No,
is
it's
a
North Carolina.
Benedict.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There is a Benedict in South Carolina that gets
Right.
confused with it.
Yeah. Okay. I thought
Um,
so. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I always have wanted to go to the South, and I guess that's my ancestors kind of tugging on me, like, come on back home. So I've always wanted to go to the South, and I wanted to go to a women's college. And so when I found out that there was a Black women's college, and obviously there's two, Bennett and Spelman. But Spelman, I always knew I wanted to go to a smaller school, and Spelman was just a little bit too big for me. And so I got into Spelman too, but I was like, this is too big for me. Like I want a much smaller environment. And Bennett is very small. When I was there was 700 women, so it's very small.
Hmm.
And Maya Angelou is was one of our biggest supporters. And Maya Angelou is my favorite writer. And so once I heard that she was promoting it, I was like, oh, if Maya is promoting it, I'm going to Bennett. And it was the best experience of my life. Like every day we were affirmed, we were encouraged. There was nothing that we couldn't do. The majority of my professors were Black women. Our president was a Black woman. That was the first time I met a Black woman with a PhD. And that's when I first was like, I want to do what you're doing. That was the
Oh,
first time I had,
really? Okay.
yeah, that was the first time I had met a Black woman who had a PhD and who studied media. And I was like, and like wrote about Black women. Her name is Yvonne Wilbon. She wrote about Black women film directors. And I was just in awe. I was like, you can do this for a living? Like you can write about Black women? And she was like, yeah, this is what I did. And it just changed my whole mindset. And so that I don't think that that would have happened if I had went to a predominantly white school. And Bennett going to a HBCU was life-changing, but going to a women's HBCU was unlike anything else I've ever experienced.
That what does a PhD do for you? What did that do, and so on and so forth? Yeah, tell us that story.
So I knew I wanted to be a professor, and you don't have to have a PhD to be a professor, but I knew that I wanted job stability, and so having a PhD helped with that. And so again, I enjoyed college so much that I didn't want to leave, and so I knew
Oh,
I wanted
okay.
to teach. And I didn't end up at a HBCU, which is still my dream, but I knew I wanted to teach about Black culture and Black media. And so having a PhD allows me to research Black people and Black media. It allows me to write about Black people and Black media. It allows me to teach about Black people and Black media. And it gives me the credentials to do so. When people hear that you have a PhD, they trust you a little bit more with
Yeah,
what you're
yeah,
saying.
sure,
And
sure,
so
sure.
I was like, if I'm going to get an advanced degree and I want to really further my career, then a PhD made sense.
Yeah, yeah, sure. What when you say research, what does that mean? How do you research something?
So in our field, we have to write research articles and we also have to write books. So I'm expected to write a book as a part of my job contract. So research, it looks like a lot of things for different people. For me, it looks like doing interviews, similar to what we're doing focus groups, analyzing podcast episodes. It looks like doing small group interviews. So I am a qualitative researcher. And so I like to get to like the story of something, whereas quantitative researchers a lot of times deal with like numbers or stats, things like that. I like to get to the heart of the story. I like to talk to people to kind of get an idea because that opens up the story. Numbers are important too, and like that data is important, but numbers don't always tell you like the story or the why behind something. And so that's what I'm interested in, which is why qualitative research was more impactful to me. I am a Black feminist. And so most of my research, I approach from a Black feminist framework. And so that's also where the qualitative part comes in. It's hearing people's lived experiences and trusting that people know what they're talking about themselves. And so I enjoy talking to Black people to get their experiences and to hear stories that are not always represented within mainstream media.
Hmm. If you don't mind, ask, what's a feminist?
Good question.
Yeah.
So what is a feminist or what is a Black feminist?
Well, you can do both of them if you want to,
Okay.
or one or the other.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So to me, I am a Black feminist because I believe in liberation and freedom for all Black people. And Black feminism specifically centers Black women in our experiences, but it also says that if we are free as oppressed people, specifically because of our identities as Black and women, if we get free, if our liberation is centered, then by extent, all Black people and everyone else's liberation is tied into our own. So if we're oppressed, if we don't have what we need to be our best selves throughout the world, then that also impacts everyone else around us. So if I am free, then everyone else around me is free. If I am not free, their liberation is tied into mine.
Can a woman cannot be a feminist
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
because she doesn't believe in feministic ways or something like that?
Well, so misogyny, the hatred of women, can be spewed by anyone. It can be spewed by women or men. And there are women who spew lots of misogynistic ideas. And there
Hmm.
are women who are just like I don't really mess with feminism. And particularly Black women, I can understand why Black women wouldn't want to be feminists, because that's why I asked you the difference between, do you
All
want to
right,
hear
yeah,
about
right,
feminism or
right,
Black feminism?
right.
Because, white feminism has been it's been very harmful towards Black women. We were not centered and we were not at the forefront. So I can understand why Black women would be like, not interested, because that's not for me, because white feminism is not for me. And that's why I firmly believe in Black feminism as opposed to white feminism.
Well, what's the origin of feminism? Is there such a thing?
Yes.
Let me stop you right there. To me, when I think of it, I think of when the women said, "I'm not wearing a bra no more."
Oh no, there's much
Yeah,
more to it.
that's the first thing that come to mind. So, what goes
Yeah.
before that, or something?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is more so like from like the second wave of feminism, which is like in the 60s.
Oh,
So there was a lot more that happened before then. And again, this is what you're talking about is more so white feminism.
yeah,
So it's kind of like we want to be sexually liberated. We want to be able to express ourselves sexually. But again, like white women's sexuality or expressions of sexuality is very different from Black women. Whereas Black women, our sexuality is tied to back in enslavement days when we're being raped and we're not being considered as rapeable or not being looked at as being violated, because we're not seen as humans, we're seen as property, we're seen as producers of chattel. White women didn't have those issues. White women's
sure,
issues
sure,
are more so like we're seen as pure, and where we work in the well we work in the home, we take care of our kids, or our kids are taken care of by Black women.
right.
And so completely different um issues. So even in terms of like the vote and women being able to vote, when they, talk about women's rights and women being able to vote like in 1800s, early 1900s, that does not include Black women. So they're fighting for white women to vote and then Black men, but not Black women. We
That's
were
right.
not included in that
That's right.
framework.
That's right.
So that has nothing to do with Brogdon. And that's like we are in our own interests, Black women are not included in that. So white women are like, if men are going to overpower us, or if within a hierarchy, if white men are up here, and then it's white women, and then they're like, where do Black women fit in? We need someone to oppress, because white women cannot oppress white men, so we need someone to oppress. Oh, Black women are right there. And so again, that's kind of like the complicated nature of the relationship between Black women and feminism. Black feminism and Black feminists are like, no, we have been here this entire time. So if you think about like Sojourner Truth, you think about Harriet Tubman, you think about Anna Julia Cooper, those women were around at the same time as white feminists, but they do not get the same credit. And so Black feminists, one of the things that we do is we're like, hey, we were there too, and our names deserve to be included in that. And so if you think about Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, they're freeing everyone. It's not like they were saying, I'm only freeing Black women
That's
and
right.
everybody screw themselves. They're freeing everyone. So that's again why I said that our liberation is tied up in other people's. Whereas some white feminists are like you said, I'm taking my bra off.
Yeah, yeah,
Where it's like,
yeah.
that's an important thing, but that's not the only thing. And so even in terms of like with the second wave of feminism, it's like we want the right to work. Black women have been working since the beginning of time. Like when we were enslaved, we were working. We didn't have the luxury of just, being in the house and being frustrated with being stay-at-home women. We weren't, that was not an option for us. We were working. So even in terms of that being something that, white feminists were like, we were fighting for, the right to work. We were not included in that. And I mean, lower income white women weren't included in that either, because they had been working too. So it wasn't like all white women, were just sitting at home taking care of their kids. Lower class women were working too. It was
Sure,
middle and
sure,
upper class white women who were working, but Black women, we
sure,
didn't have that luxury of not being
sure.
able.
Is there a Black woman that a feminist that you all say she started this talk? That Harriet Tubman, or like, and you used her name several times, Sojourner Truth. Well, there is she a feminist, and did she start saying this word? When did the word begin? I guess.
So I don't know if Harriet Tubman has ever called herself. I don't know if she would have used that term. I don't know if Anna Julia Cooper would have used that term either. Um, so I would say that the term feminist I think started becoming popular or like within mainstream media, I would say probably like in the 50s and 60s, like with Betty Friedan, but also you can think about like Angela Davis, things like that. Like, you know, in the 50s and 60s, feminism was becoming really popular. But even in terms of like the women who were trying to get the vote for women, I don't necessarily know that they would call themselves feminists. And I could be wrong, but that was like the suffragist movement. So they were suffragettes. I think that there's feminist undertones to that, but I don't know that they would have called themselves feminists. And so even with Black women, there's a movement called womanism. And so Alice Walker is the person who defined that. And so womanism basically is like Black women's response to feminism, where it's like Black women are centered. And so for a time, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there were Black women who were referring to themselves as womanists. And there are women who still call themselves womanists. I prefer Black feminists, but there are women who still very much are firm believers in womanism. And Alice Walker says that, you know, womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. So it's kind of like that they're two sides of the same coin, but they're different because purple and lavender, you know, two different shades of the same color, or like lilac or, you know, periwinkle or things like that. At the core, they're similar, but they're very distinct differences between them. And so I think that that's kind of where like the different strands. And then you have hip hop feminism, which came about in the late 90s, 2000s. Joan Morgan coined that term. So that was more so like for third wave feminists, younger feminists who are like, we are interested in hip hop, whereas second wave feminists are like, how can you be interested in hip hop and, you know, you got rappers calling you bitches and things like that. And they're like, you know, we kind of hold, like, it's complicated. It's not that simple because they're like, we acknowledge that misogyny is present in hip hop, but we also really like hip hop. And like, also there are women rappers. So like, they're like, we can make space for complications and we can make space for, it's not as black and white as you think. Like Joan Morgan talks about the gray space where it's like, it's not just black and white. There's some gray areas that fall within hip hop that it's like, yeah, we're acknowledging that it can be painful for us to listen to hip hop. And we know that, you know, we're going to hear some misogynist things from hip hop, but we still love it. We're still fans of hip hop. And you kind of see people talking about that at the 50th anniversary. Like, you know, has anything changed? And it's like, yes and no, but women, I think we can have a complicated relationship with something that we love.
Yeah. Is there if a young person 7, 8, 9, 10 or whatever says that she wants to investigate feminism and to decide if that's for her, how does she do this? Is there a certain number of books? Is there I don't know, how does she do it?
That's a great question. So someone else that I didn't mention yet is Bell Hooks. I would say start with Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks has written fantastic work. One of the very first books that I read in college, it was introduced to me by one of my professors, was Feminism is for Everybody. And I think that that book might be a little challenging for a child, but I think that it's broken down in a way that it's supposed to be accessible for a range of people. So I think that Feminism is for Everybody is a great place to start. I mean, Bell Hooks is amazing and has done fantastic things and has written so many books. But I would say that that would be a great place to start.
Okay.
And now I feel like there's even like feminist children's books, like Brittany Cooper, who is a scholar at Rutgers. She has a children's book, and I can't remember the name of it right now, but that would also be a good place to start. And it's written for young children. So I think that that could also be a good place to start. I'm trying to build up, I have 3 kids, and my oldest is almost 10. And, you know, I'm slowly trying to introduce him to concepts too. And so this is a good question for me to actually reflect on, like, what do I have in his library? And I don't know if I have anything yet. Like I've been buying him like books that feature Black girls or have, you know, Black women in them. But I don't know that I have used the term feminist yet. And I probably should. So this question is having me think about him too.
Now, for a guy a woman who calls herself that feminist and looks at it the way you do, that's a deep sister. For her to have gone inside of her to figure out who she is. Am I correct on that? She's just not out here floating in the world, let's say, but she's given some thought to where she stands on issues.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Wherever
Yeah,
you
no,
want to chime in on that.
I'm agreeing with you. I think that so I think that one of the other reasons why Black women, why I've heard other people be hesitant about kind of like embracing the Black feminist term is because a fair critique of Black feminism is that it can kind of be too theoretical and like it's not accessible. And it's more so like, oh, this is for like, people in college, or like it's in college classrooms, but there's not really like I don't see how this makes sense in my life. Like, sure, this is a book, it sounds cool, but like how does this actually apply to my life? Like, if I'm not reading a book, like what does feminism look like on a day-to-day basis? And I think that's a fair critique, because we have to be very careful that we're not having theory and scholarship that is so inaccessible that you have to have a PhD to understand it.
Yeah.
And that's definitely those are critiques that I've heard, and I understand that. And it's something that I think about in my own writing. I don't want to use words that like my cousins can't understand, because if I do that, then what is the point? Then
Yeah,
who am I
sure,
writing
sure,
for?
sure.
So I think that that definitely can be a reason why people hesitate too, where it's like, this is gonna make me feel like this is not for me, or this is gonna make me feel like it was written for a certain kind of person. And that's a critique that, as a writer and as someone who is presenting information, you have to be careful about.
As if a person says they're a feminist, is there a certain way they act? Is there a certain way they talk? A certain way way they look at the world? And if I was to see somebody like that, is there a buzzword or something like that, a code word that says, "Oh, that sister's deep because she might understand feminism"? And let me stop there with that question.
Yeah, so I will start by saying we're not all the same and we don't all think the same. Um, there are some feminists who, like, for instance, like going back to hip hop, there might be some feminists who are like, absolutely not. There is no way that you can be a feminist and listen to Too Short or listen to Rick Ross or whoever.
Right.
And there are some women who are like, yes, I can. I can listen to them and I can critique them. Like, I read a book last year by Cecily Bowen, and it's called I think it's called Bad. Is it called Trap Feminism? I can't remember the name of it, but the author's name is Cecily Bowen. And she's talking about like trap feminism. She called it trap feminism. And I had never heard the term before, but she's like, the trap music that I listen to, I find feminism within that too. And a lot of it also references sex work, which is something that second wave feminists and even some third feminists might be like, third wave feminists might be like, can't get down with that. No way that you can be a sex worker and be a feminist. And then other feminists, including me, are like, well, why can't that person be a feminist just because they're stripping or just because they're doing sex work? What about that makes them not a feminist? Is it because you disagree with the act of sex work? Or like, what about them makes them not a feminist? And so I think that that's also where it can be a little dicey because people have different ideas. So I don't think that it depends on who you're talking to. And I would say, me personally, my thoughts about feminism has changed over time, and they'll continue to change as I get older. I'm sure it'll continue to change. I think that when I was in college, I would not have been someone who, was pro sex work or even pro ho or pro, I don't know. I'm trying to think, because like Bennett can be a very conservative place. It's a Black women's institution, but they hold some pretty conservative views. Back then, when I was in college, I probably held a lot of those respectable views too. And as I've gotten older, my views have changed. So that's also why I think that it depends on who you're talking to. And I think that we all have different opinions. And I don't think that anything is right or wrong. I think that that's a part of feminism, is kind of like making space for the gray areas where we all might agree or disagree. It's kind of like someone who loves Black culture, or who's for Black people. Like, I see your sign behind you, love Black people. I know that that can be kind of contentious too, because there are, like, we are not a monolith. There's all different kinds of Black people, and we all have different ideas, and different Black communities prioritize, different things. It doesn't make one right or the other. It
Right.
just means that we are a very expensive people. And so I think feminism is the same way.
As such, is there, and this goes into your research in the media, are there feministic things that you see in the media that you say, no, that's wrong? Let's say in advertisement, other than in music. Are there mixed messages that somebody wants to get out that are of that upset feminist actions and thoughts, or that they embrace?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of something. So the thing that came to mind is Spike Lee's when he redid She's Gotta Have It, and it was a show on Netflix. Spike Lee got a lot of flack when the movie came out, and he got a lot of flack when the TV show came out. And
When She Gotta Have It first came out a ton of years ago.
mhm.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah, he
okay.
got a lot of flack from Black women and Black feminists about his representation of Nola Darling, and that they were not a fan of it. And he's gotten critique of in a lot of his movies that his representation of Black women was not fair, was not balanced, and he's gotten a lot of flack for it. So the same thing kind of happened with the TV show. With the TV show, I think that he tried to kind of like make sense of that by like bringing in more women writers. I think that like some of the episodes had women directors. And so I think that one of the critiques from like his earlier stuff was that, are you like actually talking to Black women and like hearing our experiences? Or is this your version as a man telling us this is your representation of a woman without actually getting our perspective correct? And so I think that with the series, it was like, okay, I'm going to try to do better than that by like bringing in women writers, bringing in women directors and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily know that he did a good or a bad job. Like I know
yeah.
that on one episode, one of the characters ended up getting like butt implants. And that episode was very interesting because it was kind of like critiquing her decision to get butt implants. And I think that that I remember watching it and being like, one, was the storyline necessary? But two, if you're going to include it, you need to be careful about doing it. And I don't know, it was
Okay,
interesting,
okay,
but at the same time, I think that
okay.
it caused conversation. So I
I'm
think that it
sure.
what he
Yeah,
was wanting to do, it caused
yeah,
conversation.
yeah. Now,
Yeah.
let's stay on this just a tad, and then we're gonna go more into what you teach. And that She Gotta Have It. To me, that was one of the early times I understood from a woman's perspective of how she dealt with men, and had more
Mm,
than one
okay.
man in her life, and she was dealing with her
Mhm,
sexuality. Something
mhm.
was wrong with that. That women wanted to say, "Hey, I don't like what you said," or something.
So again, I think that it was more so, I think it was a limiting representation of Black women. And I think that so this is just me kind of off the cuff,
Yeah, 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 yeah,
saying my opinion,
yeah,
but I
yeah.
think that there is a difference in the way that men right that some men are, right Black women. Like Tyler Perry is another one who gets a lot of flack for his representations of women. And so I think that the critique is like we weren't present. Like I think that, like, did you have women producers? Did you have women writers helping you to kind of flesh out Nola's character? I think that Nola Darling is a fascinating character in general. Like I loved her
Yeah,
in the first movie, I loved her in the
yeah,
series, and she's a complicated person. But again, that's where it's different kinds of critiques. I think she's a fascinating character, and I've fell in love with her instantly. I think she's interesting. And I wonder too, like look like if someone were to watch the show like now, would they like what would the critiques be? Because in hindsight, in the 2020s, you might have a different perspective on Nola than when it came out in the 80s, when it was like, wow, this representation of, a woman who's polyamorous and who has all these different lovers and is open about sexuality. In the 80s, that's not necessarily something that was
yeah,
prevalent. Whereas
yeah,
now we have
yeah,
lots
yeah.
of
Sure,
different representations of people.
sure,
So I think
sure.
people would have a different perspective. So the critiques that he got in the 80s are not going to be the same that he gets
Yeah, okay,
in,
I got
the
you.
seasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got this one. I was in Chicago some time ago, and going to Harold Washington Theater for a play or movie or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was. And there was a sister who wrote a book, and she wrote a book from her perspective of how men have treated her and not so well, so on and so forth. And when I was there, I raised my hand. I said, it would be ideal if you were able to get young men into hear your perspective so that we can understand the damage that we do when we treat you in such a manner. I don't
Mhm.
think I don't know if that's ever been a position because young men might think, oh man, she could just handle it. I just did her and no big thing, and then walk away without understanding the damage that they did to another human being. And that was the one thing that I told my son. I said, hey, I'll give you an example. I'm going to try to talk too long. He hit a girl with a snowball. That's what the teacher said. I go up to him. I said, well, what happened? He said, I don't know if it was mine. We were all throwing snowballs.
Mhm.
She was throwing them, so on and so forth. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you a pass on that. But then the next day I said, well, did you go to that young lady and ask her how she was feeling? And he said, no. He said, now I got to whoop you. I said,
Mhm.
because you didn't see her as a human being to understand that if you did or didn't do it. Has there ever been a discussion from a woman's perspective so that men can understand how they feel in the treatment that we give them?
Oh, I think there has. I think there's been a ton. Like Bell Hooks has written, she has like a love series. And so she has All About Love, The Will to Change, and then I can't remember the other one. So Bell Hooks has written a lot about it. And she's not the only author. There's been lots of
Yeah,
Black
yeah.
women who have written about kind of like their experiences with Black men. And I think that that will probably continue to be a contentious issue because there's lots of history, between Black women and Black men. And
Yeah,
I think that therapy is becoming more prevalent in my generation specifically. And so I think that as we start exploring therapy more and exploring those issues and kind of like
yeah,
really dealing with traumas and how
yeah.
to love someone in a healthy way, because if that's not something that you saw growing up,
That's right.
and it's going to be hard for you to replicate that. But if you go to therapy and like really kind of unpack harmful behaviors, or like unpack, if you have a history of having unhealthy relationships, or even just like I'm in a healthy relationship, but I want to know how to be better. I
Right.
think that those kinds of things help a lot. And I have definitely seen, especially like my male friends, it seems like they have become more
Okay, okay.
aware of their emotions and aware of how they're treating their partners.
Right.
Whereas I don't necessarily know that that was the case from the
Yes.
older men that I know.
Yeah, right. So what do you teach on a daily basis? What kind of classes do you teach?
Mhm.
Let's start there.
Yeah, so this semester I'm teaching the Black Podcast class again. I just came from the class before we got on Zoom,
Yeah.
and this is my third time teaching it. And so the classes, they are just fantastic. And so we have a class podcast, and so we have guest speakers come in. And so we had a guest speaker come in today who has a podcast about Black tech workers. And as a class, we interview them, ask some questions about their podcast. We listen to episodes beforehand, and we just get their experience of themselves as a Black podcaster. And then we produce the episodes. And we have all kind of guest speakers coming in this semester, and we did the same last semester.
Okay.
And it's a class I developed. It's my favorite thing to teach. I love teaching it, and the students are really engaged because it's an elective, so they chose to take the
Right.
class, and so they are, because there's not a lot of classes like that.
Yeah,
This is
sure.
actually one of the first ones that I've ever heard of, a class like
Yeah.
this. And so I think the students really benefit from it. And I teach it as like a very active learning and project-based class. So they are working with me to create the class. And so like we're working on a podcast together, we're editing episodes together, coming up with the questions together. They see me make mistakes. I encourage them to make mistakes. And so I don't think that they've had an experience like that where they are encouraged to make mistakes, and that it's not just about getting an A at the end of the class.
Is the mistake the not all the questions that you had to ask or not staying
The
on
mistake
topic?
can
Yeah.
be the mistake can be all kind of stuff. So like the very first one that we did, which was on Tuesday, I couldn't figure out how to work the audio. So there was audio, but it was really low, and I was freaking out. I was like, "Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
audio is really
Yeah.
low." So I called the tech people, and they came and fixed it, no problem.
Yeah. Sure.
This
Sure.
was happening during the episode. So I was like, we got to keep going. So we got to keep asking questions. And
Okay.
until they
Okay.
come, we just got to figure it out. Or, if a student stumbles over their words, or last semester, I had a student who they researched the guest, but they researched the wrong person. So they researched someone with the same
Oh.
name, and they were reading the
Oh.
bio of the person. And
Yeah.
I was like, that's not the right bio.
Oh. Okay.
And they
Okay.
were realizing it as they were reading it. And I was like, it's okay. I was like, just take a break, say, hey,
Yeah.
stake, and let them introduce themselves. Since you
Yeah.
got the bio
Yeah.
on, that's fine. So let's
Yeah.
pivot real quick. have them introduce themselves, and then you just keep going onto the questions you prepared. Like,
Yes, I got you. Is there what's an A in that class?
so I am more so interested in like the progress that they make throughout the semester. So like I want to see that you're really engaged. I want to see that you're developing really good questions. I want to see that you are doing good with your editing. I want to see that you're engaging when you're in the class. Like, are you just sitting on your phone the entire time? Are you doing your work? Are you, researching the people that are coming to class? Those are the things that I look for when I look
Okay,
to see if you're going to
okay.
get an A or not.
Well, do you teach other classes? What's another one like the media
I
or
do.
something?
Another class that I've taught is mediated communication. I taught that last semester, and that class I focused on representation. So we looked at various different representations in, regular media, new media, all kinds of different things. And so that was an awesome class too, because it was an honors class. And so it was much smaller. So it was like a seminar style class. And so that was really cool to have a smaller group because we were able to kind of just like really focus on the readings and ask questions. Because in larger classes, students get nervous to ask questions and things like that. But in a smaller group, we can do different things that we can't do in a
Yeah.
bigger class.
Well, as we almost come to a close, what you being a teacher and teaching this topic, what's your aim?
My aim is to introduce my students to as many people in the industry as I can. I want this class to kind of be like a lab where, we bring guest speakers in, they learn how to edit episodes, they learn how to publish episodes. I have two TAs right now who took the class last semester. They run our social media accounts. So they're learning how to develop a brand. They're learning how to follow up with podcasters and schedule things, make sure that, the calendar invites are out, make sure they have Zoom links. For my students, they're learning how to do transcripts of episodes. They're learning how to come up with episode topics because they are producing their own episodes. They're analyzing episodes. So they're learning critical thinking and analysis and things like that. So it's more than just, I like this episode. I didn't like this episode. Well, why didn't you like it? What don't you like about it? What did you like about it? So I really want them to develop their critical thinking skills. And I also want them to develop their creativity too, because there's definitely a large sense of creativity that's required to produce your own podcast episodes.
Yeah, I love it. When somebody walks away and they said, I took her class, I don't want to be a podcaster, but it helped me become a better speaker, a better critical thinker. You answer that question.
A better speaker, a better critical thinker, a better interviewer, better at taking chances, better at failing, better at,
I
and when I
love
say
it.
failing, better at like making mistakes, better at working in groups because there's lots of group work, and better at focusing on learning as opposed to I'm just here to get an A.
I got you. Is there an association that you belong in because of your interests?
No, but it's something that I am interested in. I actually talked to someone yesterday who has an association for Black podcasters,
Oh, okay.
and I am interested in joining more because I'm interested just as a fan, but also so that I can help my students learn more. So I am interested in joining more like industry organizations because I do want to expand my students' knowledge, and I'm writing a book about Black podcasts, so I want to be as knowledgeable as possible as I'm
Oh,
doing my
so
research.
that's what you want to write about, Black podcasts.
Mhm.
How did you find this to be such a love of yours?
I have been listening to podcasts since 2016. I had a really long
Oh,
commute when I was in grad school, and I
oh,
discovered podcasts because I needed something to do besides listen to music in the car. So I discovered podcasts and I discovered Black podcasts specifically. And once I discovered that there were so many of them, I just fell in love and I've listened to them ever since. I listen to one every time I'm in the car.
oh, okay, I got you. And so that's what you want to write your book on, and so on and so forth. So you're going to be the foremost podcast historian, even from a historical perspective, some.
I take that label. I take
Yeah,
that label.
okay,
There's not a
okay.
lot of people who have written about Black podcasts, so I'll
Yeah,
definitely
right,
be them first.
right,
Yes.
right. Well, let me ask you this. Is there a question that I have not asked you? Something that you
No,
want
you
to
asked me
share.
really thoughtful
Yeah,
questions. I
yeah,
appreciate it.
something that you want to share. Okay, maybe I get an A there. I get an A, everybody. I'm
You get
giving
an
myself
A.
an A.
You get an
I
A.
love it. Let me ask you one more thing, and I'm gonna go back to the feminists. Would you want more women to become feminists? More Black women to become feminists?
Yes. Yes, I would, because I think it's in our best interest. And I think that it's something that has changed my life. It's impacted my parenting, it's impacted my marriage, it's impacted my relationships with other women and with men. It's impacted how I raise my kids. I guess it's impacted so many different aspects of my life. And so I would definitely want as many women as possible to become Black feminists.
All right,
If they want to, though. If they don't want to, that's fine too.
yeah, yeah. I got this one coming. Man. Is it like a religion?
No,
You know what I mean? Like I want them to become so that they act a certain way or they think a certain way.
no, I don't think it's like a religion.
Okay, not in that regard. How do people follow you and learn more, stay in touch? Do you have a website, any of that kind of thing?
So you can Google me on the UMD, University of Maryland Department of Communication. My name will come up as a faculty member. I'm on Twitter at Briana N. Barner, and I'm on Instagram. Briana is growing, and that's about it for now. I do need to work on a professional website because I don't have one yet, but those are the places to find me.
All right, I'm gonna go back to this. You proud of yourself?
I am very proud of myself. A girl like me from the hood is not supposed to be where I am now. On paper, I definitely fit all the boxes of someone who was going to turn out much different than how I did. And so I'm very proud of myself, specifically for having this PhD. It was one of the most hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. And so I'm very proud of myself. I was the first person in my family to get a PhD. I know I won't be the last. One of my cousins got hers in her 50s the following year after me. And
I
so
love
I
it.
know that we literally broke generational curses. And I know that there will be other people in our family who gets it. And statistically speaking, it's more likely that my children will probably follow in my footsteps and
Yeah,
get,
right,
if
right.
not a PhD, that they'll have an advanced degree.
Yeah, oh sure. Do people call you doctor or do you hey call me doctor every that kind of thing?
No,
Yeah,
they
okay.
do, but I don't. The only
Oh,
people that I request to call me doctor are my students or if I'm in a professional
yeah,
setting,
yeah,
but
sure,
that
sure.
no.
Yeah. Thank you so very much for coming on Strong Inspirations.
This
I
was
really
fantastic.
enjoyed this. I don't how did I find you? Or you
You
find
sent me
me?
a message on Twitter.
Yeah, I sent you a message. Yeah, and you
Yeah,
responded
yeah.
to me because this is your passion. Everybody, can you feel that? Can you feel the way she comes across? How she has up came up. I don't know. Let's call it that. How she has taken. Let me ask you this: did somebody say something to you that stuck with you? I mean, like other than your parents, somebody like a mentor or something, and then you said, "Okay, I'm gonna do that."
Well, like I said, when I met my mentor, who was a professor who studied Black women filmmakers, Yvonne Wabine, when I met her, I was just blown away that she wrote a dissertation on Black women because up to that point, I did not know that you could study Black women. Like that just was a foreign concept to me. I had not met anyone else who had a PhD. I did not know that that was possible. I thought doctors were just
Wow.
medical doctors. And then I saw what she was doing and I was like, this is what I
I
want to do.
love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Everybody, there it is. And she explained it so eloquently. Hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. It's free. Don't ask no information. Hit the like button on this because I know you liked it. All you beautiful women and you men out there who got a clear understanding of how women stand. They think. There's no question about it. And you get one of them thinkers, you got to be on your A game. There's no question because she gonna outthink you. She gonna take some time when you done said something and think about it. And you're gonna have to appreciate her for that. And then hit the notifications bell, tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Go to follow her. She's coming out with this book soon, I suspect. Everybody go to my website, businessintheblack.net. Follow what I'm doing, my speaking engagements. I'm coming across the country to sharing this message in some form or fashion. And to you, my sister, I say this, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I want you to stay strong, stay safe. I love your grind. I love where you come from. I love who you are. You
Thank
found
you.
a uniqueness that no one else has.
Thank you.
There's a niche in what you do. And you allowing people to become better folk by teaching what you teach. I thank you so very much for that. Thanks for coming on Strong Information, everybody. Bye-bye. We out.
Thank
Peace.
you.
Yes.